to the word. Like every single question was scripted, gone over dozens of times by many executives, editors and executives. Absolutely. I was on script and was told not to deviate.
It's not journalism, it's propaganda. Sage Steele. She is a former ESPN anchor. She is now free from that network, and we'll explain the details of how she got out coming up in just a minute. But on a brand new podcast, speaking with Fox News Digital, she has revealed something about an interview she conducted with then President Joe Biden. It was to celebrate the opening of Major League Baseball in 2021. You remember in 2020, we had to have baseball games with cardboard cutout people in the stands because unless you're Anthony Fauci, you can't go to a baseball game. There's a pandemic after all. But Joe Biden won the election, so now we could have baseball again. Oh, thank you, dear leader. That's pretty much how the interview went. Sage Steele is now explaining why it went that way.
And this was about 2 months after he took office. That was an interesting experience in its own right because it was so structured, and I was told, you will say every word that we write out. You will not deviate from the script and go to the word. Like every single question was scripted, gone over dozens of times by many executives, editors and executives. Absolutely. I was on script and was told not to deviate. It was very much, this is what you will ask. This is how you will say it. No follow-ups. No follow-ups. Next. I knew that this was a lot bigger than just the wonderful editors that I worked with. This went up to the fourth floor, as we said, that we're all the bosses, the top executives, the decision makers are the president of our company, the CEO, where they all worked. The big picture to me is that I think it's heartbreaking. I think it's really heartbreaking that the people who love Joe Biden and say they truly care about him have allowed it to get to this point. So I'm not even looking at this from a political angle or my beliefs in anything. This is the human side of it. And when someone is struggling, we allow them to continue to be in the spotlight and put them out there in the first place when they knew there were issues. Of course, they had to know. So it's a humanity thing with me where I don't care where anyone stands and what they vote in for or who they believe in. Do you really care about that person? As a father, as a husband, as a everything.
All right. Good stuff from Fox News Digital. Here's where I part ways with Sage Steele. I do care about the politics of it. I do care about the fact that the network, supposedly a journalistic endeavor, boy, you don't think sports journalists think of themselves as the pristine, preening First Amendment champions that injects politics into every sports story that you want to see? Oh, just ask one of them. They have more self-importance, these people, than political journalists even. See, they went to the same journalism schools, Northwestern or USC or what have you. The difference is, frankly, they're not smart enough to do political journalism in Washington, D.C., so they ended up doing sports. But boy, they are so jealous of those of us who are doing journalism in Washington that they try anytime they get any sports story, they say, okay, well, what's the political angle? What's the racial angle? What's the gender angle? Come on, when the riots broke out in 2020, oh, every single sports show on ESPN focused on Black Lives Matter. So trust me, I'm very interested in this network injecting politics, scripting this on behalf of Joe Biden, owned by Disney, by the way, ESPN is. And you know how Disney and Democrats and the media and Joe Biden, they claim that they're the only ones on the planet Earth that have any respect for Black women, right? Oh, we have such we're the only ones who care. Those Republicans, those conservatives, they're racist and they're sexist, so they hate Black women. How much do you love and respect Black women when you actually don't trust them and respect them enough to conduct an interview that you have to leash them in? Would they have done that to a white man? Would a white man have allowed them to do that, conducting that interview? And I assure you, Joe Biden's people demanded Sage Steele because they wanted the Black woman interviewing Joe Biden. It's good optics, Joe. Don't worry. And then the network heads at ESPN say, okay, but we got to control her. Don't believe me that that's the view that they have of Sage Steele and Black women in general? You don't believe that they look down on them and they think that they have to do all their work for them? Well, take a look at the perfect epitome of the white liberal elite, arrogant jerk over at ESPN. Keith Olbermann, who wouldn't be anywhere if he weren't the white, liberal, arrogant jerk that he is, where his career started over at ESPN. He tweeted this out and said, of course it was scripted. If it hadn't have been Sage Steele, the dumbest person I've ever worked with in sports or news, couldn't have gotten through it. See, Sage Steele was so stupid that they had to write out her questions for her. That's Keith Olbermann's view. But of course, Keith Olbermann and all the other liberal elites like him, they're the only ones who really love, care, and respect black women, unless a black woman is guilty of wrongthink.
Why did Keith turn off his replies on that tweet?
Keith loves to he loves using his First Amendment rights, Kevin, and says the most odious, disgusting things, and then he turns off his replies. It's a remarkable phenomenon, isn't it? Let's take a look at that one more time. Yeah, you're right. Turned off the only accounts Keith Olbermann mentioned can reply. All right. Meanwhile, Sage went to our pal Adam Carolla's podcast, and he delved deeper into this. Understand something. The only people commenting on this story and actually interviewing Sage Steele and inviting them to come on are right of center. Adam Carolla is no arch conservative. He's a libertarian, right-leaning libertarian, if anything. But the only people interested in this are conservatives like us. I want to know why Jim Acosta isn't worried about this. George Stephanopoulos, this is his parent company. Would George Stephanopoulos accept this kind of behavior as a journalist if the chairman of ABC News calls him in and says, here are the questions that you can ask the president? But he's not saying a damn thing. Jake Tapper, the champion of the First Amendment and freedom of the press, where is he complaining about Disney and ESPN doing this? It's shocking to me. Isn't it shocking to you that suddenly they don't care about freedom of the press? They don't care about corporate overlords commanding exactly how their anchors are supposed to conduct an interview of a political figure? But leave it to us, leave it to me, leave it to Adam Carolla to actually care about this.
Late breaking news. You did an interview with Biden a couple of years back, and then the scuttlebutt is it was all sort of pre-scripted. Is that fair to say?
Very much. Word for word.
Word for word. Here are the questions.
Yes. Which, trust me, as a journalist, it made me sick. Like,
What?
that's just wrong, because it's one thing to have the questions scripted, and which never happens in my career. It was the first time in 28 years, first time. Almost the worst part to me was that I wasn't allowed to ask a follow-up question.
Oh, is that part of the stipulation?
Yes.
That's interesting.
So if he said something, which he did, a couple of things about his thoughts on why the Major League Baseball All-Star Game should be taken out of Atlanta at that point, because of all the racist voter laws. And I wanted to push back and say, well, what do you mean by this? Even if it's just to clarify something.
Yeah.
As a journalist, that's my job, to listen and ask, because it's not about me, it's about the viewers who are trying to listen to the commander-in-chief. And I wasn't allowed to even ask a follow-up. And there's a lot more to the story, which what led to, I think, me getting the Biden interview, which I will reveal at some point. I'm not quite there yet. But I at the same time, I'm not going to say no,
So
right? Because
Atlanta was Jim Crow 2.0, which then turned into Jim Eagle, which is about the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard anybody say.
You.
But thank you, race baiter. Thank you, race hustler.
Yeah, I am interested to hear Sage Steele tell more of this story and about how she got the interview. I have a hunch. I think Karine Jean-Pierre might have a crush on her. I could be wrong, but maybe that's why she got it. So now, who are you more outraged at? So now I just expressed a lot of anger and outrage that this network, whose strings are pulled by Disney corporate, demanded that their anchor conduct themselves in this way. But something was very interesting in that revelation, wasn't it? That she was told that she couldn't ask any follow-ups. And who would have put that demand on there? Maybe it's time to look beyond just the network executives at ESPN and ABC corporate. Maybe we should start asking questions of the White House. So let me get this straight, Karine Jean-Pierre. Jen Psaki was in charge at the time. You only offered Joe Biden up for an interview if the anchor knows that they're not allowed to ask a follow-up question. Why is that? I'd love the White House press pool to ask that question today. Every reporter in the White House briefing should only ask questions about the fact that they put demands on an interview with Joe Biden that are so onerous that you're not even allowed to ask a follow-up. Do you know what they call it? Let's watch a little bit of this interview just so you can see what a staged farce this was. This is the exact interview that Ms. Steele is referring to.
Mr. President, thank you for being here as we get set for a wonderful day in sports. Opening day for America's national pastime. So as thankful as we are to have baseball starting on time this year, we are obviously still in the rollout phase of the COVID-19 vaccine, and that affects teams and fans, everybody. So, Mr. President, how do you envision this season going with so much up in the air still?
Well, there's not so much up in the air if we listen. What I was able to do is get over 600 million doses of the vaccines available. The 3 vaccines when I announced, I've only been in office a little over 100 days, not quite 100 days, and I announced we're going to make sure we did 100 million shots. We're going to be up to 200 million. We have 600 million vaccinations available. And so we have enough to begin to vaccinate everybody in the entire United States. But people have to be responsible, Sage. They have to continue in the meantime to wear masks when they're around someone. I have my mask off now because there's no one within 30 feet of me. But have to wash your hands and keep social distancing. And so it's going to be a little while. We can't, and some people think they're being tough guys, not wearing masks. Well, guess what? They're hurting themselves and other people. You have a patriotic duty to protect the people around you. But God,
that man is such a jerk. It's quite a walk down memory lane to remember what a jerk he was to be. But of course, it's great to watch this after the fact because we know that, of course, the shot did not stop the virus. It was never designed to stop the virus, even though they lied to us, as you saw, that it would. We know that the mask really didn't have any effect. But you're being a tough guy because you're not wearing a mask. Well, you're hurting yourself. No, actually, you weren't. In fact, you're hurting yourself more if you were wearing the mask. We know that now, and they knew that at the time. But also, did you notice he had a piece of paper in front of him with questions and answers already written because the questions were already pre-approved. And he wasn't allowed to have any follow-ups. Why? Because he's incapable. He can't think on his feet. He can't respond to a question that he's not already prepared for. There's a word for this kind of interview. It's not journalism, it's propaganda. This was all a made-for-television scripted event. And why the White House isn't having to answer for this? Karine Jean-Pierre, is it true that you didn't allow follow-up questions? Is it true that the questions were pre-approved? Will you make the president available for a live interview right now without those conditions? It's a despicable White House that we're dealing with right now. And I don't know who I'm more angry at, them for injecting propaganda or the network executives for allowing it, encouraging it, and forcing it. I think I'm less upset at the White House. Because if a White House can get away with it, and if the networks let them get away with it, of course they're going to do that. The whole purpose of the First Amendment is for us to push back on it when it's demanded. Sage Steele, you'll remember, by the way, on Bill Maher's podcast about 6 months ago, actually had other reflections on this interview that she shared.
And then I said, so you were a receiver? And he started to explain it. And here's the saddest thing. His voice just trailed off. He said, I was good. And then he went silent and he goes, oh, never mind. No, you're laughing. I thought it was so sad because I realized that's why he was in his basement during the whole election cycle. Right. Because even then, he couldn't finish his sentences. He struggled. So forget about politics. I don't care. I didn't vote for him. However, that made me sad to realize.
So you didn't vote for Biden either?
No.
And that's okay.
Thank
I still love you.
Okay, thank you.
And also,
Bill Maher is just so, we talked about him earlier this week about how he, did that rant about COVID, and he's, starting to have good signs of actually understanding what the hell is going on in this country. And then hearing that story, hearing how Joe Biden has lost it, hearing what a nightmare, and knowing what a nightmare we're going through right now. And he's still like, well, it's okay that you didn't vote for him. I still love you anyway. Well, I sometimes am left speechless by the hypocrisy, by the lying, by the illogic. Bill Maher is not a dumb man. And here he is actually putting Sage Steele on the defensive But I got a question for you, Bill. Knowing everything that we know, knowing everything Sage Steele went through, knowing what she just described to you in this interview, why in the hell wouldn't she vote for someone other than Joe Biden? There would be something wrong with her, and there is something wrong with you, Bill, for continuing to support him, knowing what we know. By the way, one other quick thing. One must wonder why Sage Steele is no longer with ESPN. And surely it was political, yes, but I want to remind you exactly what the crux of it was and why she was ultimately forced out from that job. Because if you're in the business of sports journalism, it doesn't get any bigger or more lucrative than ESPN. So why did it go sour over there? Let's remember exactly what happened. She told us when it all went down.
I was asked to stop tweeting about it. I was asked to stop doing anything, saying anything about it on social media because I was offending others at the company. I made sure I sent off another tweet that night after I received that email. Because like, no, and let's stop living in this lie. And once again, oh, you're gonna silence me and Sam. She was told the same thing, for this issue, but then we're gonna let everybody else talk about all these other things that.
By the way, real fast, sorry, I didn't set it up with the full information. This issue, the issue she's talking about, is allowing men to compete in women's sports. It's a literal sports-related issue. It's not Black Lives Matter. It's not systemic racism in the judicial system. It's not COVID-related. It's not Trump says mean things on Twitter, which we hear all the time from people on ESPN. Pardon the interruption, with those raging, angry liberals, Mike Wilbon and Tony Kornheiser once in a while. Only half of that show is about sports. This is a legitimate sports issue that Sage Steele, as a former female athlete and now a woman champion of women's sports, one of her major issues on ESPN was to cover women's sports. So here she is covering it, the most important issue facing women's sports, and she was told to shut the hell up about it.
That are not even related to sports on our sports programming. And I'm like, no. If we're going to preach on ESPNW and all of these things, and I'm going to stand up for all these women, many of whom are afraid to do what Riley Gaines is doing, to do what I'm doing, and a much lesser level than Riley, than you, right? But just no. And so that I actually said this to myself as I was sending a tweet, the first tweet about, standing up and supporting you. I said, I already had the lawsuit going, whatever. I didn't know how it was going to end, but I literally said, this is a hill I will die on 100%.
That's why Sage Steele is no longer with ESPN. That's why Sage Steele is now able to tell these stories. And that's why ESPN, they should be in the spotlight. I was about to say that's why ESPN is in the spotlight, but they're not. Somehow they're getting a pass. Somehow they're getting skating by here. Somehow nobody, the champions of the First Amendment, the champions of the free press, all of those people who were angry at Donald Trump because he had an intern start to take the microphone away from Jim Acosta in a press briefing. All of those people who said that the press freedom and First Amendment was hanging in the balance because Donald Trump's in the White House. None of them are saying a damn thing about this president and his press people forcing ESPN to script out an interview with Joe Biden. It's almost like liberal journalists are hypocrites and actually don't care about the press, don't care about freedom, don't care about free speech, don't care about journalism. It's almost like they're just political operatives who are doing their best and putting out as much propaganda as they can so that their guy wins and our guy loses. It's almost like that. I'm sure that's not the case, though.